In the winter of 1961, Paul Miller, an ex-US Air Force serviceman, and 3 of his friends were enjoying a hunting trip together near Minot, North Dakota. But this hunting trip would be one that they would remember for the rest of their lives. Towards the back end of their trip, the men were stalking a deer that they had been tracking for the past hour or so. As they lay there in the thick tall grass and rocky terrain, the men suddenly heard a strange buzzing sound coming from above. As they looked into the air, they witnessed a circular metal disc which seemed to land in a nearby field. Terrified and fascinated, Miller and his friends watched in awe. Just a few seconds later, the UFO then hovered above the ground and shot off into the sky. Later that afternoon, they packed up their things and were driving back to their homes, still confused about what they saw. Then suddenly, the UFO then reappeared in a nearby field. Miller and his friends then exited their vehicles and started to walk towards the craft. Then, 2 small beings with large eyes exited the craft. Feeling threatened, Paul got out his pistol and shot at the craft. Then everything went blank. The next thing they knew, they were sitting by the car and the craft had disappeared. As they got back into their vehicle, they looked at the clock and saw that they had somehow lost 3 hours. The next day, Miller went to work at the Air Force office when 3 tall men in black suits approached him. They claimed to be government officials but showed no credentials. The men then said they hoped Miller was telling the truth about the UFO encounter, but Miller and his friend told no one about the incident and no one else knew. Not even his wife, in fear of sounding crazy. They also mentioned that saying things like this could lose him his job. In 1968, a woman who goes by the pseudonym of Adele was 16 years old. She lived in the seaside town of Scarborough, North Yorkshire. As Adele was a very active young girl, she would often spend hours with her friends on the weekend playing near the coast. It was on one of these weekends where Adele spotted a cigar-shaped craft hovering above the ocean before flying off and changing her life forever. The following day, she heard a knock on the door, and when she answered, she saw a strange-looking man standing outside. The man wore a black suit, and after staring at Adele for an extremely long time, asked her if she had insurance. A strange question to ask a child. Adele told the man that he should come back when her parents were home, but at that exact moment, the strange man began to sweat visibly. He asked Adele for a glass of water, and Adele let him inside the house. After she brought him a glass of water, he looked at it and then put it to one side. The man then looked at the clock on the mantelpiece, and Adele told him that was her father's retirement gift. The man then asked, "Is it your father's time? Is it here and now?" Adele was confused and asked what else this so-called insurance salesman wanted. He told Adele to not let her imagination run wild, and she could get into trouble at school if she kept making up stories. He then left and drove away in a black vehicle. In 1997, an individual named William Shearer was walking along the coast in a small part of Essex, England, when he saw dozens of deep red lights in a triangular formation flickering above the ocean. He then stood there and observed them for several minutes, before shooting off one by one. 4 days later after the incident, Shearer heard a loud knocking on his door. The men wore dark grey suits and long coats. One of the men stood beside an imposing-looking black car, as if standing guard, while the other stood at Shearer's door. According to Shearer, the man standing at the door spoke in a strange, almost automated way, and insisted that Shearer let him inside the house. However, Shearer refused the man entry, and the man said that they would come back later. A month later, the two men in black reappeared outside Shearer's place of work. The two men told Shearer they wanted to discuss Shearer's UFO experience. Shearer demanded to see the men's IDs, but they refused and kept asking questions. Shearer refused to let the men into his place of work, and they eventually disappeared. According to Shearer, they were very cold in their manner and were somewhat threatening. In July 2005, Carey Green was sitting on her porch in West Kentucky with her daughter when they witnessed a strange craft hovering in the nearby cornfield. In a panic, Carey got out her rifle and shot at the UFO. The craft hovered there for several minutes before shooting backwards and disappearing out of sight. A few days later, they were again sat on their porch when they suddenly noticed a black Cadillac on the edge of their property. There was no sound of any vehicle, but she suddenly noticed two men wearing black silk suits, white shirts, black ties, and wearing fedora hats. The men were pale-faced. Each had a briefcase. They both walked stiffly and unnatural. The most striking feature was their eyes, which were vivid lavender. Only one of the men spoke and had a low-pitched but clear voice. They asked whether Carey and her family had experienced any unusual activity recently. Carey then denied anything out of the ordinary, and the individuals were seemingly satisfied with a simple no, and left. Over the next few days, they would occasionally witness a strange dark outline of a man at night time stood out in the porch of their property. They eventually stopped, but this left a permanent mental impact on Carey. Is this story true? Let me know in the comments below. In mid-November 1982, Michael Elliott was 27. He was an avid UFO researcher and spent most of his time reading books and newspaper articles about UFOs and extraterrestrials. One afternoon, he had been reading in the university library near his home. It was 4:30 p.m. and getting dark. A man dressed in black with worn leather shoes then approached him from behind. He walked in a mechanical way. He was dark-skinned with black hair that looked greasy. He had a black suit that needed ironing with a black string tie. His suit was too big for him and seemed very out of place. He then began speaking to Michael. The man had a slight accent and he talked about UFOs and challenged Michael's knowledge and research. The strange individual then stated that his time would be better put to use researching other things, and what he was researching was dangerous. The man got up as if he were mechanically lifted, then put his hand on Michael's shoulder, saying, "Go well in your purpose." Michael got the idea that this man was unnatural and became very unnerved. Was this a Men in Black agent, seeing if Michael knew anything he shouldn't? I guess we will never know. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.